I find your story extremely interesting because you've had one of the biggest setbacks probably a lot of people have had. So, if you don't mind jumping right into it, I'll let you take the floor and give the audience a little taste of what you've been through before they get their hands on your book.
Sure. In 2004, I was learning to ride a motorcycle. I'd always thought it was cool and thought it would be kind of fun to learn. So I bought, not even a Harley. I had a Honda Rebel 250, which is one of the smallest bikes that you can buy that's still street legal. And I would practice in the neighborhood, go around the block. I was practicing in an elementary school parking lot and had all the safety gear, had a helmet, gloves, jacket, boots, the whole 9 yards. And on a Friday afternoon, when wife was in North Carolina, the kids were watching a video with the babysitter. I decided to just go out for 10 minutes, ride around the block and do some practicing in the parking lot. And as I would do figure eights and circles around the lot, I would also accelerate and stop because that's one of the things they do in the test is can you get on the clutch and brake and stop quickly? As I did a couple runs, it worked out fine. Then on the third time, I accelerated and at halfway across the lot, I hit a patch of sand. And if you ever lose your balance, you tend to grab onto whatever's closest to you. If you're right-handed and grab that on the motorcycle, that's the throttle. So when I hit the throttle, I shot forward, and before I had time to get on the clutch and brake to stop, I hit a curb, bounced into the air, and landed right on the corner of the curb. And as soon as I hit, I knew that I'd been hurt. Somebody saw it happen and called the paramedics. And when they got there, they put me in a collar and a neck collar and the backboard, and I could not feel my right leg. My right leg was initially paralyzed. Took me to the hospital. They had to stabilize me for 2 days prior to surgery. And just before they put me under, the doctor said, I don't know if you're going to walk again. So after a 7.5 hour surgery, I woke up and they had put me into a TLSO brace, which goes from your armpits down to your hips to hold you in place because I had a 4-level spinal fusion. They had to go in and relieve the pressure on my spinal canal because that was compressed by 60%. My L2 vertebrae was exploded into 3 pieces. They had to glue that together. They had to do a bone graft for my hip. And I spent the next 2.5 months in the hospital learning to stand and walk again. So yeah, you could say I've been through a bit and not something I would have chosen to do, but it led to some very interesting things happening after that.
David, what I find interesting about that, I remember being 14 years old. I think, yeah, 14, maybe grade 8. And all of my guy friends had these Honda little dirt bikes. And I remember
Mhm.
test driving one of those. When you mentioned using your right hand and knowing where the throttle is, I'm surprised that I wasn't through an accident similar to that. It's not the same as driving a car. You don't really know what you're doing. And the interesting thing about your story is you woke up that day not thinking that that's what was going to happen.
No, no, I think with any major life event, you always think it's going to happen to somebody else. And when it happens to you, that is quite a mental adjustment that I had to go through because I was in the hospital and my legs didn't work. It took me almost the entire 2.5 months just to be able to stand and walk 10 feet. And that was a huge amount of effort because after you've been on your back for a long time, your muscles just kind of atrophy. And you don't realize how much strength you lose until you don't have it. So it was quite the experience to go through and to try to come back from.
Even though it's taken time to remember exactly what was happening at the time, but in the
Mhm.
moment, did you have any idea what was happening?
Yeah, I was very clear headed. I didn't hit my head. So thankfully, I was wearing a helmet. So if you do ride a motorcycle, wear a helmet. They're very good for what they're used for. But I never lost consciousness. I never blacked out, and there aren't any gaps in my memory. But what I do remember was when I was lying on the initial moment of impact, then lying on the pavement trying to figure out what happened because I was looking up at the sky and I heard people yelling, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. And it took me a second to realize because I've got a helmet on, I can't hear what they're saying. when they started, when the paramedics got there and started checking me, they're feeling my arms or my one leg, and I'm thinking, and I'm wiggling my toes and trying to figure out it. And I realized my right toes didn't work. And that was quite a realization to think, okay, what now? I knew it was bad and I knew I shouldn't move, but I didn't know quite what to make of it. But I was conscious the whole time. I never blacked out.
That's almost a scary part. You probably wish you just woke up and was told what has happened. The fact that you were conscious the entire time, that's almost scarier, knowing exactly what happened.
It did give me a lot of time to think about, okay, what does this mean? Is this something that's going to be permanent? Is, especially when the doctor said, I don't know if you're going to walk again. I've got a wife and two young kids. I don't know what that means to them. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back to work, even though I work in an office. I mean, it's not that hard, physically hard of a job. But I had to wonder about that and wonder what the other side of this would look like. And I felt that way all the way through the hospital and really up until right before I left. Because about a week to go before they were talking about discharging me, I had a nurse. Her name was Peace. She was from Ghana, and she was the one who was on duty the day I came in to the rehab hospital. And there's an event that I went through and that I talk about in the book where they had to intubate me and I couldn't breathe. Well, I mean, technically I could breathe, but I felt like I couldn't. And she was there with me while I'm coughing and gagging and trying, wanting this thing out. And she thought that she was recommending they send me back to the critical care hospital. And about 4 in the morning, after having it in for 14 hours, I wrote her a note that said, take this thing out. And she said, I can't. And I'm like, take it out now. She said, I don't know what'll happen. And I wrote on there, I don't care. She went and got the doctor, they evaluated, and they did take, and fortunately, I was okay. But we went from that to about 10 days before I left, wheeled my chair up from the PT or rehab shop. And I said, hey, Peace, look at this. So I locked my wheelchair into place, pushed myself up out of the chair, and slowly walked around the nurse's station and sat back in the chair. And I looked up and said, what do you think of that? And Peace had tears in her eyes because she saw where I came from in how far I had come since that point. And that was a realization for me. It was, yeah, I'm the person who's involved in this, but what happened to me really affects lots of other people too. And I didn't think about writing a book at that point. I mean, that was a long time ago. But when I look back on it, I said, that's a moment that they need to capture because that's a moment that changed her life because of what happened to me.
Take me back to the moment where the paramedics and the doctors are saying, "We don't think you're gonna walk again." That's something big to say. As a doctor, you don't just say that flippantly. You say that only if you are very sure. As a person could be like, "Okay, that's my reality. That's kind of my future. I guess this is what it is." But it sounds like right away you were like, not sure about that." Because you seem pretty determined, or was that later on?
Well, I've been stubborn ever since I've been a kid. You know, being stubborn and getting angry can be seen as negative things, but if you put them in the right direction, you can do a lot with them. When I was told that, I don't know if I knew how to process it just at that time. Mike Birbiglia, who's a comedian and storyteller, he tells a story about how he sleepwalks. And at one point when he was sleepwalking, he jumped through a second story plate glass window at the La Quinta Inn in Walla Walla, Washington, and came back in to the hotel desk all bruised and bloody and said, I think I need a doctor. And when they told him about what happened, he said, well, I guess I'll go on living. I've tended to look at I don't minimize them, but my first reaction is, well, I guess I got to deal with this. And I don't know if I realized the full impact of it at the time and may have minimized it at the time. And because when I look back at it and I tell people the story, they say, wow, you went through that. And I feel like the old Monty Python bit is, I got better. Because when it happens to you, it's hard to look back and see, okay, what does this really look like from the outside? Because I'm just going through it. But there were a lot of times where I was down or depressed or uh, not defeated, but felt bad about the situation that I was in. But I tried to keep focused on, okay, what can I do right now? And as long as I kept my focus there, that seemed to be the right thing to do.
It sounds to me that you refused to have a victim mentality. What do you think?
I think that I eventually got there. There were times where I felt like, why did this happen to me? Why am I the one that this had to happen to? Because um, I'm sure your listeners may have had things happen to them and think, well, why did I have to go through this? Why couldn't it be someone else? There were times that happened to me too. But there were just as many times where I thought, and it does go back to when I was a kid. If somebody tells me I can't do something, I'm going to show them come hell or high water because that's kind of my makeup is I don't like being told no. And as I say in the book, I try to use that force for good because as long as I'm using it for a positive thing that doesn't hurt anybody else, I think that's a good thing. I think when stubbornness or anger get in the way of relationships, then that's a negative. But as long as you use those forces for good, everybody's happy.
How old were your kids at the time, and how did they process everything, and how did your wife process everything?
Oh, she was angry. She was very angry
Probably
and
very
rightfully
upset.
so.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you look at what what that put the family through. That, why would you risk something like that? In my mind, I wasn't risking anything because I was being safe. I was being practical. The kids, my this is 2004, so my daughter was 6 years old and my son was 9 years old, and they had to come and visit me in the hospital. And the hospital was a 45-minute drive on a good day from home. So I got to see the kids about once a week for 2.5 months. And when I came home, it took me a while to learn how to be at home because when your kids are 6 and 9, 2.5 months is a long time. They change, they're taller, they're smarter, they can do more, and they've done a lot of things without you. So it took me a number of months to reintegrate back into the family. And, I don't blame my wife for being mad at me because she, I think, had every right to be.
That was probably harder than the actual accident, coming back into your house and being like, "Oh, wow, like, 2.5 months, I've been gone for a while, I gotta re," as you said, reintegrate. That's probably hurts more than the actual accident and the recovery probably.
Was Jeremy Irons would say, "You've no idea." It was quite, there was just as much emotional healing to go through as there was physical healing. And it takes a toll on everybody around you. And I don't want to minimize that at all.
So you go from a doctor telling you you'll never walk again
Mhm.
to running marathons. David, that's insane. I don't know if I'm gonna ever run a marathon. So I read in your bio you run 5Ks all the time. That sounds like a feat in itself for me. So how do you go from that to that? And I think anyone would say that's insane.
I would agree with you. There's a well in the book there's an 8-year period from the accident to where I decided to start running again. And I do cover that in the book. We get to like November of 2012 because even though I could walk fine at that point, I learned how to ride a bike again, and I had done a lot of riding because that was non harmful, not a lot of impact with that. I had gained a bunch of weight. I gained like 80 pounds since the accident. Yeah. And there's a bike ride I did called the Assault on Mount Mitchell in 2008. I tried to do it. I got to 80 miles and had to bail because it was too steep. The ride ends on top of a mountain. I got about a third of the way up and my legs are cramping so much. And as you climb that mountain, you start to regret your previous dietary choices because you got to haul all that weight up the mountain with you. I got to a point where I said, I don't like where I am and I want to make a change. And so I went back to my doctor who did the spinal surgery and said, "Can I run?" And he said, "Yeah, somebody's chasing you." So I signed up for a 5K just to make sure there'd be somebody chasing me. But the first time I went out jogging, not even running, I made it about 60 feet before I had to stop because I wasn't used to that. But the second day, I went out and did 100 feet. And over time, I would like jog 60 feet, walk 60 feet, jog 60, just kind of do that. And over time, built up to where by that was November, March of the following year in 2013, I ran my first 5K post accident and wasn't fast. And by that following November, I did the Indianapolis Monumental Half Marathon, so 13.1 miles. And thought, if I can do half, why not do the whole thing? That's when you see the stickers on cars say 13.1. That's somebody who's run half as far as somebody who's run a full marathon. But I started putting together a bucket list of what I wanted to do now that I showed I could do that. And so in 2014, the following year, I put together what I called the anniversary tour. And in February, I did a rowing competition indoors. And then 2 days later, I took the train up to New York and I ran up the Empire State Building. A couple months after that, I did my first and second sprint triathlons. I did the assault on Mount Mitchell again, but that time I finished it. And then in November, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. So if you look at the progression, you know, 10 years before that, I was in a wheelchair. A year before that, I ran a 5K. 6 months prior to the marathon, I rode up to the top of the mountain.
It's just one thing after another, but in a good way where you're like, "Okay, I can achieve that. What's next?"
Yeah, and each time there was something, okay, there's something different that I wanted to do. And it wasn't to be first or fast because I am none of those things. In fact, if you look up the 2014 results for the assault on Mount Mitchell, I am the last official finisher. I even think that the the failures are just as interesting of a story because everybody has been at a place where they failed at something, and there's always something you can learn from it. And when tried to do that bike ride in 2008, I was like, you need to lose some weight before you try this again. When I did it in 2014, I kept falling further and further back in the ride because they only let it's about 2,500 people start the ride, but they only let 800 people climb the mountain because it's a state park. There's only so much traffic they allow on the road. And as I started to slow down, I had to get up and walk the bike because I was cramping. Then I get on the bike and ride a little bit further. Then I'd have what they call the broom van pull up behind me and say, "Would you like to quit?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'm going to keep going." Then they pull up again and say, "Would you like to quit?" It's like, "No, I'm fine." It's like death stalking you the whole way. Then the third time I said, "How many people are behind me?" They said 7. Okay, got to keep going. Then it was 5. There was 3. There was 2. Then it was, "You're the last guy." And they said, "Would you want to quit?" I said, "Look, if I run out of time, I will get in the van. But as long as I've got time, I'm going to keep going." And it was about a mile before the finish, came around a switchback and put my foot down. And as soon as I put my foot down, my entire leg just cramped up and I fell over. So here I'm still attached to the bike with my other shoe. And park ranger comes around the corner and sees me lying in the road. He thought I'd been hit by a car. And I get up, he helps me up, and he says, "Look, you're running out of time. You got to get in the car." And I'm like, "I don't want to quit." He was like Richard Gere and an officer in a joke. I got no place to go. So he helped me back up on the bike. He helped me stretch out. I got on the bike, and with about 9 minutes before the cutoff, got across the finish line. And I was the last place finisher, but if the way I look at it, I won because I didn't quit.
And they were continuously giving you an out to get out.
Oh yeah. I could have told everybody, well, I could have said, "Look, they told me to get out." I could have put it on them. But, I look back at my daughter was the one who convinced me to go back to the event. How she'd be disappointed if I didn't finish. And I didn't want to disappoint her again. A couple years ago, the Disney races down in Florida, we did a 10K and a half marathon together, 2017 and 2018. I had signed up to do the marathon weekend, which is like 4 consecutive days. It's a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, and then a full. I thought, why not? But during the half, I started to have IT band problems and they kept spraying this stuff called biofreeze on my legs. And by the time I finished, but I was in a lot of pain. And my daughter said, "You are not starting tomorrow." And she was right. If the next day I probably would have ended up with an injury. And, sometimes it's okay to quit because if you're going to hurt yourself, that's not why you're out there. Certainly not why I'm out there because running is painful and I don't do it to get hurt.
Sounds like this daughter of yours is a force to be reckoned with. Sounds like a lot like her dad, hey?
She is. She's a senior down at the University of Alabama and still has a 4.0 average. So she's smarter than me for one thing.
I've been to university. 4.0s are not easy to get.
No, I never had one.
I think in my 4th year I did, and I don't know how because I felt like I was busiest. But I guess it's you just get the exact of what you need to get done at that point. But don't quote me on that. I'd had to bring out a transcript. I'm probably lying.
Well, I never did it. I was lucky to get out of college and count myself fortunate.
What did, your wife and your children think once you started getting out and going running?
So I let them come to the events. I wouldn't make them do the events because, they're not all fun, but including them as much as possible, as much as I could.
Do you think when you're going through any type of setback in your life or physical injury, anything, a support system is really important to get you through it?
I think so, but you have to realize the support system only goes so far. A support system is there to help you, but they can't go through it for you. There's a lot of head work that you've got to do yourself. Uh, and one of the things that I found was I could never think my way out of a bad situation. If I felt down about something or I was disappointed in something, I could never think it better. What I had to do was to get up, get off the couch, and get out the door and go. Do something physical. And by the time I came back, I'm like, okay, we can do this. If I was mad or upset, I'd go for a bike ride. I'd come back and was like, okay, I'm good. So I would encourage people to have those support systems around for them, but also to take the physical steps you need to do to make things change. Because I'm a big fan of taking action to improve things. Because you don't always have to even have the right answer, but it's a lot easier to make adjustments when you're moving than it is standing still, both literally and metaphorically.
Between everything you were through in your accident, the recovery, even running the marathons, talk to me
Sure.
about some of the highs and lows of that. The tough times, but also some of the good times. But you can tell me about some of the tough times more.
Sure.
Give our listeners a little taste of really what was going on.
The tough times are always the better stories because even if you have nothing else, you've got a story to come out of it. One of the things I started doing was riding to work occasionally because my office was 21 miles from my house, no more than twice a week, and about an hour and 15 minutes to get there. So I'd start out early. I would bring with me, I'd shower and work, go to work. Then I'd ride home. And it was actually a lot of fun because, if you commute to work and you're driving in traffic, you come home, you're all mad because you've been sitting in traffic all day. The way it worked for me was if I got on the bike and rode home, by the time I got home, I'm like, that's all gone. I'm in a good mood. So wife and kids loved it because I was in a positive mood when I got home. I didn't have to fight the traffic. But Thanksgiving Day or Thanksgiving week, we had already gone down to her parents in North Carolina. And I was staying a little bit. I was going to drive down the following day. So I had one last day, this day before Thanksgiving, to go into work. And I thought, I'll just ride because there's nobody here. Nobody's waiting on me. So I rode into work. It's beautiful, cool weather in the morning. And around 10 a.m., started to drizzle outside. And I thought, I can ride in this. Then it started to rain and the temperature started to drop. And around 4 o'clock, the temperature had dropped to about 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was solid rain. And I'm thinking, leave your bike down in the garage, go take the metro home, call a cab to get you to the house. You'll be fine. And then I thought, I can do this.
I'm sensing a
So I get
theme
on the
here,
bike.
David.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get off something once I get on a certain track. But I get up, go down, start riding, and within 10 minutes on the bike, I was just soaked and miserable. And like you could hear my feet squishing in the pedals, and I'm soaked through to the skin. The temperature's so cold, I'm starting to get hypothermic. And it took me almost 2 hours to get home. And by the time I got home, I was shivering, I was cold, I was freezing, and nobody was home. So I'm in the garage. I lean up the bike. I'm going to deal with that next week. Go in the house, strip all my clothes up, throw them in the washer, jump into a hot shower for like 45 minutes. Then I put on like a sweatshirt and sweatpants and some nice wool socks and turned on the fireplace and just fell asleep in front of the fireplace because I was too stubborn just to take the train home. So that was fun. The Mount Mitchell ride coming in last was fun. The Empire State Building run up, that was an interesting story because I had to raise, because like a lot of events, you have to have a certain qualifying time to get into, but I am not one of those people. So I had to raise money for a charity to get in the event. And so I signed up and agreed to raise $2,500 to do that. And after I did that, they said, if you don't raise that, you have to come up with the rest. I'm like,
I like their
so
setup,
I was
smart
motivated.
business.
Well, very smart for them. But by putting the story out I did on social media, I went with the hometown newspaper. I got written up in the Washington Post. I was able to raise the amount I had to. But when I went up to the event, we were on the show Good Morning America that morning and got to the event, and it was huge. They only allow 500 people to run up the building every year because they make more money on tourist tickets up the elevator than they do on the lease of the building. So they allow them to shut it down for 2 hours and they run everybody up, and then they all have to come back down so they can start at the elevator again. That event runs 2 days before or a week before the run up. I'd been practicing running upstairs and I broke my toe.
Right before this race.
And I'm thinking,
Ugh,
yeah. And I'm thinking, what do you do? It's like, I can't drop out because all these people contributed to this charity. So I'm going into WebMD and saying, okay, how do you fix a broken toe? And the answer is you don't. You tape it to the next one.
that's what WebMD.
Unless the bones, yeah, unless the bone's poking through the skin, if it's just a fracture, you tape it to the next toe until it heals. But since I couldn't run up the stairs, what I did was hiked up the stairs two at a time. So I didn't have that impact. But the way the event goes, they have a men's elite start and a women's elite start, where there may be 10 or 12 runners that just burst up and they're all shoving each other going out to the top. Then they get to the normal people, or at least the non-elite people, and they start them off every 5 seconds. And when I started off, I saw people right at the start, where at the start I passed a couple people and a couple people passed me. But for the next 20 minutes, I didn't see anybody. It's like there's nothing going. I don't even know if there's an event because I'm not seeing anybody. I'm just climbing up the stairs on some stupid building. And so 86 floors, about 1,000 feet straight up to the top. You come through the door, there's everybody cheering for you. And they immediately put you on the elevator and send you back down because you can't hang out upstairs. But it was a lot of fun, and you wouldn't normally get the opportunity to do. And that was a really memorable time. But I have just as much fun remembering the times that went bad as the good times, because the good times are great. I mean, they're awesome, but I think they're balanced by what you learn out of the ones that went the
I
wrong
find a
way.
lot of people though, meaning the everyday person, they have a hard
Mhm.
time with the lows and the downs of life because they feel like life should always be up here. And that's just not how this works, is it?
No, and those good times wouldn't be nearly as good if they're all the same. It would be boring. And it's nice to it's fun to look at somebody else's life. So wow, they've got everything going on. It's like, well, maybe not. Because you don't see everything they've gone through. Because I think everybody has struggles that they work with, that they deal with. Everybody has obstacles that they need to overcome. And even though you don't see them, doesn't mean they're not there. But the good times, I think, are more memorable when they're balanced by something that went off the rails. And the way I try to look at it is, even if it goes off the rails, there's got to be a story behind it. And that's what I do in my blog. It's what I've done in the book, is to write about things that may seem on the surface hard to go through, difficult to go through. But if you can find either what's funny or what's memorable about that, I think it makes all the good times worthwhile.
What I'm getting from you is you just have to have a bit of a good attitude about it. Gotta be I get the vibe from you. You're very resilient, you're very determined, and I would say those characteristics very much led to a speedy recovery for you, would you say?
I think they help, but and I don't want to be all sunny and Pollyanna about it because I have been through the ringer on more than one occasion. In fact, somebody I was talking to once said, "What you've gone through would have killed a lesser mortal."
Most people.
That's what I tell people. You're unique, but you're not special. Everybody goes through this stuff. You may not have gone through a motorcycle accident. You may not have gone through all the twists and turns that I write about. Everybody has challenges that they have to deal with that may seem in the moment like you're the only one and there's nothing you can do to help it. The good news is this will pass. You'll get through it. And even if it's tough, you'll have a heck of a story to tell somebody later.
Good party story, I would imagine.
What I try to do when I'm telling a story is to talk about things in ways that people can identify with. Because if you tell a story that is life altering or difficult to listen to, you've always got to give the reader or listener a way out of the story. Like, not all stories have happy endings. In fact, most of my favorite stories are what's either have ambiguous endings or even sad endings. But you've got to show a change from the start of the story to the end because you've got to leave people with something at the end that's different than they started with. Because if all you do is tell about the bad stuff that happened, the reader's response is going to be, that must have sucked. Well, yeah. What I think you have to balance that with is this is what happened, and this is how I've changed, or this is what happened, this is what I've learned. This is what happened, and I'm never going to do that again. There's got to be some sort of lesson or moral to the story that gives the reader or listener something to take away from, other than that person's life must be hard. Because if all you talk about is the good stuff, people are like, good for you. And they want to get away from you just as fast as they can. So I think you have to balance it with the good and the bad because that's what life is. Life is a series of highs and lows, of goods and bads, of yeses and nos. I think all those things come together to make it a good story.
And all that being said, can you give the audience a little bit of a glimpse into the tough times of everything you've been through?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a section of the book. The book is in 4 sections. The first one talks about the accident and recovery. The second section talks about learning to walk again and kind of getting back to normal. The third section is called climbing and crashing. It talks about when I was doing Mount Mitchell for the first time. A week after I got back from Mount Mitchell, I was riding to work and got hit by a car. Although it's a bicycle trail, there are a number of street crossings. And one of the things I learned is that you can't trust somebody in a car because number one, you're invisible to cars. If you're on a bike or a motorcycle or whatever, or you're a pedestrian, treat yourself as invisible because you pretty much are. So whenever I get to an intersection and somebody waves me through, I always hold up a hand to thank them, acknowledge they're there, and they point the other way because that's where I'm going to look next. So I pull up to this intersection. It's only a 2-lane street in a small town, and person on the right stops, waves me through, thank them, point the other way, car on the other side stops. So now the street is blocked because both sides have stopped. So now that they've stopped, I start to roll forward on the bike. And by that time, I think there are two or three cars on the right hand side. Somebody three or four cars back either was on their phone or wasn't paying attention or was didn't want to wait. So they went around all the other vehicles on the right through all the parking spaces. So not even a lane. And as soon as I cleared the one vehicle, I see a car coming up under me. Fortunately, it was a Honda Civic, which has a sloped hood. So he went under me. I went up on the hood and slid back down once he stopped. I'm still attached to the bike. My feet are still clipped in. And the guy jumps out and he's trying to pull me off the bike. I'm like, get your hands off of me. Initially, he claimed that I rode out in front because I call it the spandex defense. And what he didn't realize is I have more gadgets on me than NASA astronauts had when they went to the moon. I had a GPS, I had a heart rate monitor, I had a cadence sensor that told how fast I pedaled. And so after he said I rode out in front of him, the judge said, do you have anything to say? I said, well, Your Honor, let me show you the stat. So I had, from the GPS, I had a map of me leaving the house, going all the way to that point, showed my speed, my heart rate, my pedal cadence, and it showed me coasting, slowing down, showed my heart rate going, and it showed me stopped for a full minute before going forward. Then it showed me moving forward at 3 miles an hour. Then there's this big spike. I said, Your Honor, that's where he hit me. He was found guilty of what they call failure to yield. And I got my bike replaced. I got my medical bills paid for, but it did take 3 years to settle that out. So I was in court a lot during that time. That was a low point. The following year, I lost my job. I eventually went through a divorce. So there were a lot of low times that I went through, and I don't want to minimize any of those. But the way I've always looked at things are, no matter what you're going through right now, there is something better at the end of it, even if it's not what you're looking for. Because I would not have thought 5 years ago that I would have written a book about this. I would not have thought 5 years ago that I would be doing a podcast talking with people about that story. I would not have thought that I'd be on stage at the Moth telling a story that, went up on YouTube and the hundreds of, or even thousands of people have seen at this point. Some of it may not be what you're looking for. And that can be for both bad things that happen as well as good things that happen that you were never expecting. So I try to keep a hopeful outlook on things. So I tell people, it's like, if I wake up on the right side of a dirt, it's going to be a good day because there's the opportunity to go out and do something new. And I'm always learning something, even if it's a lesson not to do that one thing again.
It's funny, before you just chatted about that, I was gonna ask you what you would say to someone if they just had a major setback, but I think you just covered that, hey?
Well, the thing I would say to somebody who's going through something tough is this is this is what's right now. So deal with what's right now. And I think there's an I think it's an old Irish saying. Don't worry about the trouble out there. There'll be trouble enough when it comes. Focus on what's right in front of you because that's really all you have to deal with. Learning how to run again and being able to go further. It's like I never thought about it in terms of, well, I've got to get from here to there. It's really, I had to get started. And that what's led to the title of the book, because somebody asked me, what was the toughest thing about running a marathon? I said, the toughest thing wasn't recovering from the accident. It wasn't training. It wasn't getting through the wall and getting to the finish line. The hardest thing was getting out the door. Once I did that, the rest was easy. And that's what led to the title of the book is the hardest thing is getting off your butt, getting off the couch and getting started. Once you're in motion, the rest of everything else becomes a lot easier. And that's the advice I would give is deal with what's right in front of you. And the other stuff, you'll get there when you have to deal with it. But I have probably seen as many setbacks or more than some people for anybody else, that's been around for as long as I have. But I keep being optimistic about it. And that has not been a bad strategy because that generally has been how things, if I've kept my positive attitude about it and kept moving, things have generally worked out. They're pretty happy with it.
I would agree with that. Were you speaking and writing books before the accident? No, right? You didn't start your speaking career and because this is your first book, correct? But you were writing your blog for a while.
This is my first book. Yeah, I've been writing the blog really since 2009, and there have been times when I haven't written anything for a year. As far as writing really didn't start until just a few years ago. Speaking, I've been involved in Toastmasters for the last 6 years, and if anybody wants to know the best way to improve your self confidence, to feel comfortable getting up in front of an audience and speaking to people, I highly recommend Toastmasters as the place to start. It's what they call a comfortable place to fail. It's a very welcoming audience, and there are people with you going through that growth period too. So I've been speaking for a while, and I've always been comfortable on stage. I played in bands for God knows how long. And I've done stand up at Stand Up New York, as well as DC Improv and a number of other clubs. I worked at a resort in college where I worked with some guys from Second City, Chicago, not Second City, Toronto. What I've learned from speaking is, and especially storytelling, is goes back to what I said earlier, is you can tell a story about anything. People say, "Well, I can't tell stories." Yes, you can. If you had to drive to work today, that's a hero's journey story right there, because you've got a goal that you want to accomplish. You've got all these obstacles in front of you. You have things that happen along the way, and then you get to where you wanted to go, and maybe you've learned something. So you can tell a story about anything. What I've done at the DC Improv is stand-up comedy, because stand-up comedy, even though it may seem off the top of your head, the material is already created, just responding to the audience and delivering that material. Because I love the writing part of that, because you get the chance to take an idea and refine it, refine it, refine it, and eventually it works.
My first year of university, I took an introduction to acting
Mhm.
class and we did a lot of improv. And that was a really good taste of get rid of your ego, become
Oh, yeah.
vulnerable, the whole yes and. And what I love about improv and how it ties back to this podcast is in life, you just have to take what's handed to you and go, yes, and,
Yeah.
you know?
What's next?
And you
Yeah.
a lot of your life, like, it's funny that you have your cat today. Based on all your stories, it seems like you've already passed 9 lives, hey?
I figured at some point I'm going to run out the clock and not come out on the top of things. I took a couple improv classes last year, and the skits that we did that turned out the best were where I completely just wasn't trying to be funny, wasn't trying to play to the audience. It was like, "Okay, go with it." One thing that we call superhero, where you have a superhero who starts the skit and he or she runs into a problem, then they call for help. And then another superhero comes on, and then another one. And every superhero has a different non superhero trait. I think the one I had was I could only do dialogue in opera, singing. And I can sing. I've never sung opera, but that was one thing. And my other trait was that I had really huge hands. And even when I've done scripted stand up stuff, sometimes there's just something that pops in your head and it feels right and you got to go with it. And going back to things that have happened to me, somebody will say, "Well, how did you write a book?" And I think, I'm just making this up as I go because I don't know what the rules are. And I would encourage anybody listening to forget what you should be doing. As long as nobody else is being hurt, do what feels right in the moment. And that leads to all sorts of possibilities that you might never have considered. It's like the whole opportunity thing. When that door opens, sometimes it's good just to step through it. I used to think that fear was a wall that stood between me and what I wanted to do. And the more I've done, I realize that fear isn't a wall at all. It's a door that you have to step through to get to the fun, the excitement, the adventure on the other side. And when you're feeling that fear, you can't see what might be out there. because you're so consumed with what's going on inside your head. But the cool thing is, all that fun, excitement, adventure, you won't experience until you step through the door, because that's where the fun is. It's like the Manfred Mann song, that's where the fun is. And I would encourage anybody to, again, turn off that filter and step through that door, because that's where the fun is.
We could honestly talk all day, David, truly. Like I said, I feel like you've already lived 9 lives and you will be back on this podcast another time, because 'cause I'm sure
That would be
you'll
awesome.
go through 3 more things by the time we chat again, I'm sure. But before we close things out, I wanna chat about your actual book for a bit.
The book is called Get Out the Door, and it will be available on Amazon this fall. I don't have a release date for it yet, but we're trying to do it before the holidays. So if you go to my website, www.hollyworks.com, that's HOLLIWORKS.com, you can sign up and get the first chapter, download that for free, and they'll have you on the list to get the announcement for the book when it's released.
Everyone should read your book, but who do you think this book is best for? Who's really gonna resonate with it?
That's a good question.
You're
That's
like
a very good
everyone.
question. I mean, there are some people who don't or are not motivated by these kinds of stories, and that's okay. This story is not for everyone. But I think the people that it will resonate with are people who've had obstacles thrown in front of them that have challenged them, that have knocked them down and forced them to think about, okay, how do I get back up from this? And that's not always a physical challenge. It could be a job loss. It could be end of a relationship. It could be, it could be anxiety that's keeping them from going out and doing stuff in the world. And they don't have to want to run a marathon, because it's not for everybody. And as you get older, running gets harder and harder. I'm living proof of that. So it doesn't always have to be a physical transformation story. It's really to show people that the way you get from where you are to where you want to go by getting started. And that's the message that I would want to send for anybody who's interested in reading the book: is getting started will get you anywhere you want to go.
I talk to a lot of my friends all the time about we always see a lot of people launching businesses and doing the things that like, we have dreamt about. And I always say the only difference between them and us is they're doing it and we're talking about doing it.
Oh yeah, you can talk about it till you're blue in the face, but until you commit, until you start moving forward. In fact, I outline that in the book. Is if you want to go anywhere, first you've got to identify whatever obstacles in front of you. Then you've got to take that first step towards that. Get out the door every day. It's rinse and repeat. Just keep doing those things. Um, you're gonna fall down. You're gonna run into things. You're going to have setbacks thrown in your way. But, you fall down 9, you get up 10. As long as you keep getting up, you're still in the race.
I love that. I think that will resonate with everyone, no matter really what they're going through big, small, physical, emotional. I think that resonates a lot. So, to close it all out, I feel like you've left the listener with a lot of great golden nuggets, but where can we find you is the best question.
Okay, on my website, it's hollyworks.com, as I spelled out before. But that is my social media handle. So if you go to Facebook, look up Hollyworks. You go to Twitter, go to Instagram, go to LinkedIn. If you do HOLLIWORKS, that is my handle for everything. And if you go out to the website, it's got not only the first chapter of the current book, but I'm also putting out stories every week for things that happened when I was a kid. And when I finish those will go in another book at some point.
And is it best for the listener? Maybe we can give, because I know on your website you have the first chapter for free.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
with email sign up. So maybe I can put that direct link in the show notes in case they want to get a quick taste of what your book's going to be all about so that they can get excited about when the actual book comes out.
That would be awesome. In fact, one of the things I have in that chapter is I ask people to send me their stories if they've gone through something that they would eventually like to share. Um, Feel free to share with me, because I'd be happy to amplify their story, because I think everybody goes through something like, may not have gone through exactly what I've gone through, but everybody has obstacles, everybody has challenges, everybody has places they want to go. The most important thing is to get started and get in motion.
You've left the audience with a lot of golden nuggets, and I just want to thank you. I feel that you're helping me launch this podcast on a high.
Well,
I
good.
I don't know how I'm going to measure up to this.
Well, I'm happy to be a guest. I would love to come back because there will be another book beyond this.
And I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to books because I've always been a bookworm, and your style of writing is one of my favorites. It's very conversational, it's very easy to read, and you feel like you're in the story, which I love.
Well, thank you. I showed somebody the entire book, and he said, "You've got a larger vocabulary than this. Why do you write this way?" I said, "You never use a $3 word when a 50-cent word will do. You've got to be able to be conversational." As you said, I want people to feel like they are in the story because even if it didn't happen to them, you get on the ride and you go around, and what you want to have happen is you want it to be so memorable that the first thing you want to do is get right back on.
Agreed. Well, David, thank you so much for chatting with me. I could
Thank you.
truly do this every Sunday night, honestly.